The MLB season is coming to a close, and with that, it's time to talk awards. Now, the real-life awards aren't always the most interesting. Most of the time, we already know who's going to win them. These awards only care about one thing, and that is production. Sometimes the stats that we use to measure production don't quite capture the full value that a player provides. That is where the second annual Analytic Awards comes into play. These awards take a deeper look into players. These awards range from the luckiest players to the MVP to the worst player in the league. Just a quick note, last year's Analytic MVP was Witt Jr, so with the year he had this year, this might actually mean something. Also, make sure to stick around to the end to find out the worst players from the 2024 season analytically. Without further ado, let's get into the first award, and that is the luckiest players of the 2024 season, one pitcher and one hitter. The two winners are Reynaldo Lopez and Mark Vientos. Let's start on the pitching side with Reynaldo Lopez. One of the most surprising breakouts, Lopez had just a 1.99 ERA across 135 innings in 2024. Under the hood, though, the numbers weren't as impressive. His FIP was much higher at 2.92, and his expected ERA was all the way up at 3.88. This was a result of him giving up a lot of hard contact. He had a hard hit rate in the 20th percentile and a ground ball rate in the 34th percentile, meaning he was giving up a lot of hard contact, and that contact was resulting in balls in the air, a combination that pitchers do not want to have. With a relatively small sample size for a starting pitcher, he was able to post a sub-2 ERA, but as a pure pitcher, his season wasn't as impressive as that number suggests. Now going into the offensive side with Mark Vientos. Vientos broke out in a big way for the Mets in 2024, posting a WRC plus of 133, which ranked 23rd amongst hitters with at least 450 plate appearances. He hit .266 with a .322 on base and a .516 slug, good for an OPS of 838. This is some great production, but if we look into some of the analytics behind this production, they are not as promising. Vientos hit 32 home runs this season, but according to StatCast data, he was only expected to hit 25.9 based on the contact that he made. This is a difference of 6.1, which was the fourth largest in 2024. Another telling stat is the difference between his expected WOBA and his actual WOBA. His expected WOBA was down at 335, while his actual was up at 356. This means the contact that he was making wasn't quite up to par with the results that he was getting, and the sustainability of this great production is a little questionable. Now, Vientos is still a young player and will continue to develop, but Mets fans, you might want to temper your expectations a bit going forward. It's now time to go to the other end of the spectrum, the unluckiest players. The unluckiest pitcher of the 2024 season goes to Brandon Pfaadt of the Arizona Diamondbacks. Pfaadt posted a 4.71 ERA over 181.2 innings, which at first glance you would think he had a bad season. A lot of people who look at that ERA will think he had a bad season, but this is not the case. His strikeout rate was 24.3%, which is above average in the 60th percentile, and his walk rate was only 5.5%, all the way up in the 87th percentile. His FIP was only 3.61. His expected ERA was only 3.75, a difference of 0.96 from his actual ERA. This difference was the third highest in the league. His B-WAR, which takes into account run prevention with ERA, was only 0.5. His F-WAR, which looks at the underlying numbers and is much better at predicting the future success for pitchers, was much higher at 3.1. He strikes out a good amount of hitters, he doesn't walk anyone, and he's still pretty young at just 26 years old. You might look at the ERA and think he was bad, but he actually had a much better season than that would suggest. The unluckiest hitter of 2024 is a pretty well-known name, and that is Fernando Tatis Jr. of the San Diego Padres. Tatis did not have a bad year production-wise, but we've definitely seen better from him. He had a .276 average, a .340 on base, and a .492 slug, good for an OPS of 832 and a WRC plus of 135. If you look at his expected numbers, this guy was expected to be good at pretty much everything. 96th percentile expected WOBA, 97th percentile expected batting average, 96th in expected slugging, 97th in exit velo, and 99th in hard hit rate. While his expected WOBA was all the way up at 393, his actual was only 359. The difference between these two is the fifth largest in the league, suggesting that he was making a lot better contact than the results he was getting, hitting it hard right at defenders or hitting a ball that barely dies on the warning track. Next year, if he keeps this same type of contact up, I would expect closer to an MVP type season for Tatis in 2025. Before we go any further, only 3% of you watching this video are subscribed, so if you enjoy the video, consider subscribing. It's completely free and it really helps the channel grow. Now it's time for the Reliever of the Year award, which is named after Dellin Betances. Betances never had a season where he racked up a ton of saves. He was never a guy that posted a super low ERA, but he's a guy who in his prime was one of the most dominant relievers that we've ever seen. I don't think he gets the recognition he deserves because he never racked up the more celebrated reliever stats like saves and ERA, stats that aren't really in his control. That is what this award stands for, recognizing the most dominant reliever regardless of the stats that aren't entirely in their control. The 4 nominees for this award are Emmanuel Clase of the Guardians, Cade Smith of the Guardians, Mason Miller of the A's, and Griffin Jax of the Twins. All 4 of these guys are great, but after careful consideration, I have decided to give this award to who I think is the most dominant pitcher in the league right now, Mason Miller. Now, I know a lot of you are probably thinking that Clase is by far the best reliever in the league now, and I get where you're coming from, but let me explain. There are 3 main ways a pitcher can impact the game. 1, getting strikeouts. The second way is control, limiting walks and getting ahead in the count. And lastly, inducing weak contact. Mason Miller is the king of the strikeout. He's in the 100th percentile in strikeout rate and nearly double that of Emmanuel Clase. I know you might be saying, Clase isn't a strikeout guy, he throws strikes and induces weak contact, which he does. His walk rate is only 3.7%, which is less than half of Miller's 8.4%. Clase also has an elite average exit velocity at just 86.5 miles per hour, which is in the 92nd percentile. Hitters just don't hit the ball hard off of him, which is great and what makes Clase so good. What if I told you though that Mason Miller is even better than Clase at inducing weak contact with an average exit velocity of just 86.1 miles per hour in the 96th percentile? Miller obviously didn't have the save numbers that Clase did because in order to get a save, your team has to win. Miller was on the A's and Clase was on the Guardians, obviously a big advantage to Clase and something that Miller cannot control. ERA is also not completely under the control of the pitcher. The defense has a big impact on runs that score. Mason Miller was pitching in front of a historically bad defense with an outs above average of -45, the worst in the league, even worse than the Chicago White Sox. If Clase was pitching with this defense, a guy who relies on his defense a lot, most likely he would never have an ERA this low, thus making Mason Miller my reliever of the year. Switching back over to the offensive side, the next award is the Terrence Gore Baserunner of the Year. Terrence Gore, a big-time pinch-running extraordinaire for the mid-2010s Royals teams, was known for one thing, his base running. And I have 4 nominees for this award: Corbin Carroll of the Diamondbacks, Shohei Ohtani of the Dodgers, Jarren Duran of the Red Sox, and Elly De La Cruz for the Reds. Oftentimes, the only base running stat that people look at is the stolen base, which is a big part of base running, but it doesn't give you the full picture. Base running runs above average takes stolen bases into account, but also things like taking extra bases on balls in play, which are just as valuable. Base running value even controls for base runner speed in an attempt to measure pure base running skill. This decision for me is a pretty clear and easy one. The 2024 Terrence Gore Baserunner of the Year goes to Corbin Carroll. This guy is just crazy on the base paths. First in base running runs above average, first in base running value. These plays that I'm showing you right now, he somehow ends up on third base after both of them. You're not supposed to be able to do that, and we don't see anyone else do this as consistently as Corbin Carroll does. Hands down, he is the best base runner in the league, and there's really no argument. Now it's time for one of my favorites, the Clutch Player of the Year. The NBA actually made this an official award in 2023, but Major League Baseball has not gotten there yet. The winner of this award had one of the best storylines in 2024, the 31-year-old Jurickson Profar for the San Diego Padres. After years of not living up to his top prospect hype, Profar finally broke through in 2024, and especially in clutch situations. In high-leverage situations, Profar had a WRC plus of 327, meaning he was 227% better than the league average hitter. This number puts him in first place by far, over second place Juan Soto by nearly 100 points. Other names in this list include Brandon Lau, Jesse Winker, Jonathan India, and Willy Adames. In 61 high-leverage plate appearances, he went 22 for 45 with 8 home runs, had a batting average of 489, a slugging percentage over 1,000, and an OPS of over 1,600. These are insane numbers, especially coming in high-leverage situations. They're going to lead to a lot more wins for the Padres. Profar was someone who very well could have been out of the league this year given his age and his performance last season, but he stuck with it and was the clutchest player of 2024. That's enough talk about offense for now. It's time to talk about defense. Now, I do think there's a fairly obvious winner for this award, but I still have 5 nominees to shine some light on some guys that deserve it. Dalton Varsho of the Blue Jays, Pete Crow Armstrong of the Cubs, Brenton Doyle of the Rockies, who was the 2023 winner, Jacob Young of the Nationals, and Patrick Bailey for the Giants. There are 3 main all-encompassing defensive stats that are used today: DRS, or defensive runs saved, UZR, or ultimate zone rating, and FRV, or fielding run value. Here are these 3 stats for the 5 nominees and their rankings for them. For Bailey, UZR does not include catchers, so the equivalent of it would be framing runs, or FRM. All of these guys are great defenders. They prevent many runs that are just as valuable as scoring them on offense, but they aren't as celebrated. The runaway winner for Defensive Player of the Year is Patrick Bailey. He would have won it last year too if he played a full season. This guy is just so good behind the plate. I made an entire video on this guy a couple months ago, so if you want a full breakdown of it, it's in there, but I'll go over it briefly here. The 2 main ways a catcher can provide value on defense are framing and throwing out runners. It just so happens that Bailey is elite at both. He's in the 98th percentile in caught stealings above average, which takes into account the position and speed of the runner when the catcher receives the ball. When it comes to framing, he's in the 100th percentile in framing runs, 16 according to Baseball Savant. When you take into account his framing and his arm, his fielding run value is 22, the highest in the league, meaning he's prevented an estimated 22 runs on defense, which are just as valuable as 22 runs scored on offense. The guy had an OPS of 637, but still put up an F4 of 4.3. That's just how good he was on defense. The Rookie of the Year is next, and this also is another easy one for me. He's going to win the real-life Rookie of the Year, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It's Paul Skenes. 33% strikeout rate, 95th percentile, 6.2% walk rate, 78th percentile, 89th percentile ground ball rate, 76th percentile exit velo. There's not an area where this guy struggles. He posted a 2.44 FIP, a 2.54 xFIP, a 1.99 ERA, and a 2.50 expected ERA. This is not just a good season for a rookie, these numbers are top 3 in the league. This is not just a top rookie, this is a top pitcher in general. The only thing holding him back from being in Cy Young contention is the fact that he was brought up in May, so he doesn't really have the sample size. The runner-up Jackson Merrill had a great season, solid hitter, plays great defense at a premier position, all great analytical things, but Skenes is just on another level. Now it's time for the Underrated Starter of the Year. This award goes to the best starting pitcher that didn't get a whole lot of recognition in 2024. The winner, pretty easily, is Christopher Sanchez of the Phillies. Christopher Sanchez often gets lost amongst the star-studded rotation in Philadelphia. Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola lead the way, and even Ranger Suarez was getting a lot more hype than Sanchez at the beginning of the year. Now that we're at the end of the year, there's an argument to be had that he actually was the best out of those 4. Now, Sanchez is not going to wow you with crazy strikeout stuff. He only had a 20.3% strikeout rate in 2024. That's only in the 28th percentile. Where he excels is inducing weak ground balls, a strategy well fit for a starting pitcher. He had a 98th percentile ground ball rate, over 58%. His hard hit rate was in the 82nd percentile. That was a result of his elite downward movement on both his sinker and changeup. The sinker had 2.6 inches of drop above average, and his changeup had 5.3 inches above average. These are both near the top of the league. The hitter thinks the ball is going to be higher, but it drops much farther than expected, leading to a lot of contact on top of the ball, which of course will lead to ground balls. Sanchez had a FIP of exactly 3, which was 5th in the entire league and even a better mark than Zach Wheeler. Stay on the lookout for Christopher Sanchez in 2025. Now it's time to reveal the MVP, the Analytical Most Valuable Player. This is a player that I've talked about a ton on this channel. I actually made a whole video breaking down his game not too long ago. He's really young, he's really good. For the Cincinnati Reds, Elly De La Cruz. The basic stats that people often point to, like strikeouts and errors, paint Elly as a relatively bad player. He led the league in both errors and strikeouts in 2024, which usually isn't a great sign, but these stats have a lot of problems on their own, and I go into full detail about this in my video about Elly. The stats that actually matter for the Analytical MVP are not strikeouts and errors, though. Elly posted a 6.4 F4 in 2024, which was the 9th highest across all players. He's exactly what I'm looking for in an Analytical MVP. Number 1, he hits the ball hard. He was in the 88th percentile in average exit velocity and 90th percentile in bat speed. Number 2, he plays great defense. He posted an 11 fielding run value, which was in the 94th percentile. His 15 outs above average was in the 98th percentile. He's also playing this elite defense at one of the most important defensive positions on the diamond, shortstop, which really helps his case for the Analytical MVP. 3, he's a great base runner. We already talked about this a little. He actually was a nominee earlier for the Baserunner of the Year award. Lastly, and the most important part for Ellie taking this jump this year, was the discipline. He had a 9.9% walk rate, which is in the 72nd percentile. He also chased only 26.9% of the time, in the 60th percentile. Last year, these numbers were a lot worse. If one guy in the National League could take the real-life MVP from Shohei, I would put my money on Ellie. Now it's time to get to the worst players of the year, first with the anti-Cy Young. The 4 nominees are Kyle Hendricks, Griffin Canning, Martin Perez, and Cal Quantrill. The worst pitcher in 2024 goes to Martin Perez of the San Diego Padres. Perez just doesn't have it anymore. He was signed by the Pirates on a 1-year, $8 million deal before they traded him at the deadline to the Padres. What made Perez so ineffective? Well, he only struck out 18.1% of the batters faced. That is in the 13th percentile. This isn't necessarily the end of the world if you can pitch to contact, but Perez did not do that either. He had a 45th percentile walk rate at 8.3% and a 26th percentile hard hit rate, meaning hitters were making a lot of contact and they were hitting the ball hard often. His expected ERA was all the way up at 5.38, which was the second worst. His FIP was 4.9, which was the 6th worst, and he put up only 0.5 FWAR despite pitching 135 innings, one of the worst marks in the league. Now we go to the offense, the least valuable player in the league in 2024 analytically. There are a lot of candidates for this award, so let me just go down the list. Miguel Vargas, Jordan Beck, Dylan Carlson, Adam Duvall, Jack Sawinski, Hunter Goodman, Tim Anderson, Noel V. Marte, Joey Meneses, Christopher Morel, and Brian De La Cruz. But these guys were not bad enough to even get a nomination. The top 5 spots, in no particular order, go to Jose Abreu, Martin Maldonado, Alauris Montero, Brandon Drury, and Eddie Rosario. All 5 of these players were well into the negatives when it comes to WAR. The winner, or loser, of the least valuable player analytically in 2024 goes to Brandon Drury of the Los Angeles Angels. He was statistically the worst hitter in the league in 2024 with an expected WOBA of just .261, which was the worst qualifying mark in the league. That means the contact he was making was just not good. He had a 2nd percentile expected batting average and a 1st percentile expected slugging percentage. A positive note though, he was decent at drawing walks and avoiding strikeouts, but that's not enough to counteract the quality of contact he was generating. He was also below average on defense, which caused his value to be even lower. Unfortunately, he ended up with an FWAR of -2.1, which was the worst out of all players in 2024. So there you have it. The 2024 annual Analytic Awards are now over. Let me know if you would change anything, or you can suggest a new award for next year. If you made it this far, make sure to subscribe. It's completely free, and I will see you again next time. Goodbye.